There is a clinical paradox involving highly emotionally intelligent people. They often experience chronic nervous system exhaustion while operating in objectively safe, non-abusive environments. This exhaustion exists outside standard biological models of stress. There is no active threat to escape and no overt conflict to fight. The fatigue is the result of an internal structural adaptation, a calculated biological response to how a person processes connection. This is the geometry of an externalized identity. On the left, a stable system regulates itself using an internal baseline. On the right, it depends on constant feedback from an external source, pinging it to determine its emotional status. Maintaining harmony requires the system to override its internal data, adapting by shutting down its independent rhythm to mirror the erratic external node. The brain authorizes this exhaustion because the false self demands a continuous performance. Sustaining this architecture over time leads to a specific type of systemic failure. Resolving chronic relationship exhaustion requires addressing this structural collapse. Managing the psychological symptoms of burnout is ineffective if the underlying regulatory baseline remains outsourced. The origin of this architecture is a foundational survival axiom. For a child, the need for attachment overrides the need for authenticity. When an environment makes authenticity a risk to connection, the nervous system learns to systematically suppress internal truth. Survival dictates that safety through belonging takes priority. Psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott classified this survival strategy as the false self. The false self operates as a trauma-informed heuristic, a highly effective method for maintaining connection when the cost of being oneself is too high. Alice Miller identified the specific mechanism of how this adaptation develops in parent-child dynamics. A child learns to perfectly map a parent's emotional needs, but the cost of this mapping is a total loss of awareness regarding their own internal states. This childhood heuristic often persists into adulthood, dictating how a person navigates romantic relationships, friendships, and professional environments. Traits often praised as high empathy are frequently automated survival responses designed to prevent the catastrophic threat of abandonment. Running the false self protocol in an adult life imposes an immense real-time computational load on the brain. The nervous system must run continuous background processes, monitoring microexpressions, anticipating reactions, and softening the truth to maintain external harmony. This resource allocation illustrates why exhaustion is profound. Processes dedicated to monitoring and conflict avoidance consume nearly all bandwidth. When resources are diverted outward, the internal self is starved of processing power, lacking bandwidth to answer, "What feels true for me?" This starvation leads to dysregulation. The nervous system exists in a state of chronic anxiety because the core self is being constantly negotiated away to preserve connection. This creates a disconnect where the logical mind rationalizes a relationship as fine, while the physical body continues to suffer from deep fatigue. The body registers self-abandonment as a threat. Regardless of the narrative the mind creates, the physical architecture triggers a stress response when the self is erased. Chronic anxiety in highly accommodating people is a systemic alarm, signaling that their emotional stability has been outsourced to an unstable environment. A system cannot sustain this level of self-erasure indefinitely. Eventually, the cost of adaptation exceeds the perceived benefit of the connection. The nervous system initiates a shift through a specific biological signal, healthy anger. Healthy anger functions as a clarificatory signal, distinct from the destructiveness of rage or retaliation. This signal marks the moment the pain of self-betrayal finally begins to hurt more than the fear of disappointing others. It indicates that an internal boundary is being breached. As seen in the schematic, healthy anger acts as a circuit breaker. It is a pulse of energy that severs the tether to the external node, forcing the loop of hyperaccommodation to halt. Once the tether is cut, the system stops performing. Processing power is finally redirected to a hard reboot, centering on the question, "What is this doing to me?" This shift is the moment the nervous system begins to reclaim the self, prioritizing internal integrity over external approval. Healthy anger is an essential defensive protocol. It provides the physical mechanism required to stop systemic self-abandonment when the mind is too afraid to do so. The final objective of this systemic correction is the achievement of emotional authorship. Emotional authorship means operational decisions are no longer organized around the perceived reactions or approval of others. This transition does not lead to isolation or a lack of care. It is a shift in where the person's emotional home is located. This represents structural stability. It is the understanding that a durable emotional baseline cannot be built inside the unstable architecture of another person's nervous system. The result is a new capacity, the ability to disappoint others without experiencing a catastrophic internal collapse. Self-worth is detached from external perception, ending the cycle of surviving through others. Carl Jung proposed that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. That transformation depends on the cessation of the false self-performance. It requires the courage to exist as oneself even when connection is at stake. Self-love is the structural decision to stop making choices against the self to preserve attachment. True freedom is the return to an internally governed life, a return home to yourself.